talk about some of the good things that he's done, because I should say in my book, I give him credit where credit is due, and I don't hold back on the criticism. So.
Yeah. What about all the orders in council that he passed, like bypass in Parliament? I heard it was over 3,000, just showing his contempt for Parliament.
Well, here is an interesting. I do cover sort of how he ran the government, and to a degree, some of this has been emulated by his successors. But the end of cabinet government, as we knew it, we had cabinet government in this country all the way up until Pierre Trudeau, which meant that it wasn't a one-man band, that it represented, the country was represented around the cabinet table, different points of view. What Pierre Trudeau did was to increase the power of the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office. We went from having a staff, basically a correspondence unit, and a coordination unit in the Prime Minister's office of 35 people, up to 90 people. We had regional desks in the Prime Minister's office that took the place of political offices. And, in terms of Pierre Trudeau's ethics in government, he's seen as this fellow who is, pure, that he was not compromised at all. It's only because, we didn't have the internet back then, and we didn't have the kind of journalism that we have today, that his trips around the world with the wealthy, that he was hosted for, that really never came to light. There's a piece in the Ottawa Citizen this weekend about 24 Sussex Drive. I'd like to know who paid for the pool that went into 24 Sussex Drive. So this was a pool that he wanted, that the people in the clerk of the Privy Council said, well, we can't have the taxpayers paying for this. This would be political dynamite, and you'll pay a price for it at the polls. And so, what does the chief of staff to the Prime Minister do at the time? He said, "I'll get the money privately." Doesn't that kind of remind you of something? He said, "I'll get the money privately." And so, Senator Keith Davey and Michael Pitfield, concocted the scheme where they collected $250,000. We don't know if it's from 2 people, 10 people, or 20 people. And the reason why is the list was never disclosed. At least with Michael Wright, we know who wrote the check, and that was to the taxpayers. So here is this, $250,000 to this day. We don't know who paid for it. I mean, did anybody get access? Did anybody get a meeting with the Prime Minister? Any special favors done? We don't know. And to this day, we don't know.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment. I'm starting to understand where you're coming from the last time you spoke to this time. But the FLQ were a lot bigger than we realized. I was there the night. I was there in La Fontaine. I'm starting to understand where you're coming from. But the FLQ were a lot bigger than 6 thugs. There weren't 6 thugs in the park. I was in La Fontaine Park in the afternoon, and then at night I was standing waiting for the parade. They were throwing light bulbs over the light bulbs filled with paint over, and they were pushing us from the back. I managed to get out of there, but they were a lot bigger than you're claiming. Six thugs? No.
So when I quoted James Cross. James Cross is the one who said, as far as he was concerned, it was 6 kids trying to make a revolution. The people who were in the park, who were harassing you and making you fearful, and who may have been throwing things at you, these were people who should have been thrown in jail. They were committing crimes.
But
they were invoking some terror. And you know what? We have laws, and we have police. You're entitled to peaceful protest, and when you cross the line, you break a law. For sure, throw the book at them, throw them in jail. I think it's quite different to say that we are going to respond to protest, peaceful and otherwise, by suspending everyone's civil liberty, by controlling the press, by giving people the right to arrest anybody without warrant. We're now into an authoritarian state at that point in time. And as I said, after September the 11th, did they suspend the Bill of Rights in the United States of America? No, they didn't. They passed a specific piece of legislation, the Patriot Act, that was appropriate to the threat that they were experiencing. So I'm quite strong on this point. There was no evidence that there was an overthrow about to happen of the government. There was protest for sure, and you may have felt that, it's kind of like you feel good when you're giving it to them, in terms of the people who are breaking the law. But it was, in my view, completely irresponsible, inappropriate, and Trudeau lied to us about the threat that we were under. He did not produce the evidence that would have warranted the same piece of legislation that was necessary in a time of all-out war. And he could have very easily, he had all-party consent to pass a remedial piece of legislation to deal with the specific terrorist threat, but he chose not to. He didn't want to, because he wanted to bring that hammer down as much as he could. I don't want to diminish in any way what people felt at that time and the uncomfortableness. What I criticize is the response.
You've done a good job of laying out the history and telling us, all about the shenanigans, if I can put it that way, what Trudeau's legacy is, and we all know about the scars that have been left because of that, and how that set the table for many of the situations we now face within government at every level, not just the federal side. So the question now becomes, once we have this information, how do we repair the damage? I don't know that we'll ever get it back the way that it was prior to 1968. There's a book that's called 1967 Canada's Best Year. So to get back to pre-1968, I think is a bit of a pipe dream. But we can get some of it back if somebody gave you a wand and made you king for a day. What changes would you want to see in Canada to restore some of our democratic processes that have been damaged, if not totally made useless, by Pierre Elliott Trudeau?
Well, what a great question that is.
I ask questions for a living, sorry.
A wand for a day to undo the damage. Well,
I give you 2 days.
So, on the economy, we're almost back. In fact, Jim Flaherty has set a target for debt to GDP ratio that out 5 or 6 years, which would get us back to the same debt level that we had in 1968. So we're almost back there. Our government spending and revenue is about almost back to where we were in '68. So we've come a long way. We've pretty much undone most of what the unemployment insurance reforms that I've talked about here. I guess the only thing that we can't undo that Pierre Trudeau left us with, because through democracy, through democratic reforms, we can undo it all. The only thing that we can't undo is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Constitution, because that's almost impossible to amend and change. And I think, what we have with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was the largest transfer of power away from accountable elected officials and into the hands of the judiciary.
But couldn't we do that theoretically? Now, I understand the chance of doing this, but could we not repeal the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Constitution that was
Take the mic off your chest, your heart's beating back.
What I'm saying is, could we not undo that by repealing the Charter of Rights and Freedom and going back to the DNA, which is our Charter of Rights and our list of freedoms as well?
I don't think, to amend the Constitution, we see how difficult it's going to be simply to deal with settlement. It basically requires unanimity. That's a legacy of Pierre Trudeau's Constitution. So I'm not optimistic that we would ever get the national will again to bring us back to the point where individuals took responsibility. It wasn't all about socialism and about government. I think we can undo, a great many things. I would love to see in this country that we have 2 political parties rather than 4 or 5. That we can do ourselves. In Quebec, to a large degree, they got rid of the Bloc Québécois, but then they come back, they did that democratically. I think if we had 2 political parties, we would have a more united country, we would have a stronger government, and we would have an effective opposition. We really haven't had a strong government and an effective opposition in this country for a very, very long period of time. So I think the one thing that we really can undo is that Constitution Act, and I think we would have more tools within our democracy to deal with serious challenges we had if we didn't have that Constitution.
But if we were to have two political parties in this country, we will have a very big left wing and a small right wing. So that's not a very good idea.
Not in my
because the Liberals and the NDP will get together, yeah, and they will pull the country left. There are not enough right wingers.
Well, you see, I would say that those who are on the right side of the political spectrum would certainly have to moderate their views in order to be relevant and electable to 50% of the population. So, you might say, isn't it great today that conservatives can get elected with 35% support? You might not feel so happy if a socialist party got in with 35% support and the 30% of the conservatives got drowned out. You might not think it's such a great idea at that point in time. I think we're vulnerable. And I think, the conservatives should be